Please be seated.
Government Bills and Orders for third reading. Bill 4, Public Safety and Emergency Services Statutes Amendment Act 2025, number 2. Honourable Mr. Ellis.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. I rise today to move third reading of Bill 4, the Public Safety Emergency Statutes Amendment Act number 2. Mr. Speaker, this is a simple, common sense bill. Legislation is about allowing officers to form an association through the Police Officers Collective Bargaining Act, which governs labour relations for municipal police officers in Alberta. It's about protecting victims of domestic violence and fixing bureaucratic holes in our justice system. While this government acts to protect Albertans, there are certainly other folks opposite who seem to want to stall, oppose, or complain. Mr. Speaker, this is simply about public safety. Bill 4 will strengthen the foundation of the new Alberta Sheriff's Police Service by ensuring its future police officers have the same collective bargaining rights and labour relations rules as municipal police services in the province, something you would think would be supportive of the members opposite. They claim the sheriffs do not want this. Well, Mr. Speaker, I too have spoken to many sheriffs in this province, and they're telling me a very, very different story. My office has heard directly from sheriffs, Mr. Speaker, and from those conversations I can tell you there is immense excitement, as well as the Chief of the Alberta Sheriff's Police Service. He's out talking to members frequently about opportunities that, quite frankly, are just around the corner. Instead of supporting these hardworking men and women, the NDP wastes time talking about everything other than what is in this bill. The opposition spent hours talking about items completely and utterly unrelated to the bill, because frankly, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing in this bill to vote against. Yet still, the opposition is not transparent, and it's full, and is quite frankly full of misinformation. For example, they will tell Albertans in this House that Alberta's government is dismantling Alert. I heard that, Mr. Speaker, that the integrated child exploitation teams are being cut. Mr. Speaker, that is simply not true, and quite frankly, has nothing to do with this bill. We spend over $55 million on Alert annually, and increase the size of ICE to over 60 investigators. That's double what was not only a short time ago. The NDP also claimed that we're cutting victim services. That's absurd. That is not true. They are terrified of innovation, Mr. Speaker. They are stuck in the past, and we're trying to build a modern policing service that is responsive to Albertans. Mr. Speaker, I know that's tough because the leader of the official opposition in 2020 defunded the police in Calgary by $20 million. That's 5% of the policing budget, and this caused catastrophic harm to the Calgary Police Service when he was the mayor of Calgary, which the service, quite frankly, has not still recovered from. I think it's clear how the NDP would govern if, God forbid, they were ever given a second chance. But, Mr. Speaker, as I have said before, people in rural Alberta have rights, despite what the person in Calgary, Buffalo seems to think. You know what? Rural Albertans have rights. And we need to make sure that when someone is calling for the police, that someone is attending that call in a timely manner. I cannot justify having a sheriff who's minutes away from a break-and-enter spend a half hour explaining to a complainant that they just cannot help. It's not right, Mr. Speaker, and I will not stand for it. So the ASPS will continue to augment and support the police services in the province, including in Calgary, including in Edmonton, and including in rural Alberta, Mr. Speaker. The NDP can stand on the sidelines and criticize and deny the white paper even exists, which says that Public Safety Canada may not continue in contract policing past 2032. That is a decision, quite frankly, that has not been made by the federal cabinet as of today. Mr. Speaker, in fact, I would advise members of this House to read this report but also actually read the government's legislation. They will see in the House that the Alberta Sheriff's Police Service would be under the direction, they would say that this service would be under the direction of myself. That is once again absurd, Mr. Speaker. This is entirely false. The members of the House who have actually read the legislation will already know that the ASPS will be an independent entity separate from the government. They have their own chief. They have their own oversight board. Mr. Speaker, the other side of the House may like to fearmonger, but this government is focused on keeping Albertans safe. And we will stand with all of our officers, to ensure that we do keep communities safe. When someone calls 911 in Alberta, I expect someone in uniform to show up to that call to service in a reasonable amount of time. I have heard horror stories from rural municipalities about the lack of police and their response times to calls for service, and it is not acceptable for First Nations people to wait 6 days for a response from their current contract service provider, Mr. Speaker. It is not acceptable for First Nations to hire foreign mercenaries to deal with violent repeat criminal offenders. It is not acceptable for First Nations people to just accept the police are just not coming to the emergency, Mr. Speaker. Those are not my words. Those are the words of chiefs all throughout this province, Mr. Speaker. And I will not continue to stand for it. And this is why we are continuing to do what we are doing. Every Albertan, Mr. Speaker, regardless of where they live, deserve to feel safe. They deserve to feel secure. And they deserve a timely response when they call 911. And anything else is just simply unacceptable. I, too, was at RMA last week, and as I am sure the members opposite were as well. And I'm sure they heard the same stories. Authorized strength levels in the RCMP are at a very concerning level, right across Canada, Mr. Speaker. This is not exclusive to Alberta. 30% short in Manitoba, 25% short in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, these are consistent numbers that we are seeing right throughout the country. We're talking about thousands of people, Mr. Speaker, that the RCMP are short. So we must be nimble. We must think outside of the box in order to help police jurisdictions right here in Alberta. And this is the quickest way to get boots on the ground in a timely manner. The ASPS will fill the operational gaps that other police services cannot currently meet. Mr. Speaker, the lack of physical officer presence in a timely response is the core complaint that I have heard consistently from Alberta municipalities all throughout this province, Mr. Speaker. So work is well underway to establish the ASPS's organizational capacity and the operational standards through this bill. And these amendments would help ensure that service is ready to provide municipalities with another choice for meeting their law enforcement needs. And I urge all members opposite to put any differences aside and vote for enhanced public safety in this province. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the bill strengthens our defence against the scourge of domestic violence through vital amendments to the Disclosure to Protect Against Domestic Violence, which is also known as Clare's Law. Mr. Speaker, this is a literal matter, of course, of life or death. We are giving the Integrated Threat and Risk Assessment Centre the clear legal authority to cut through bureaucratic red tape and immediately access police databases. Time is, of course, of the essence when life is at risk, and we are closing that loophole that may cause any fatal delay. Our actions ensure that when a vulnerable Albertan seeks protection, trained officers can share that critical information quickly, responsibly, and with absolute certainty. If the opposition policy may be to keep victims waiting, which I hope that it is not, Mr. Speaker, then certainly they have a right to vote no to this bill. But thirdly, Mr. Speaker, the legislation improves the operational efficiency of our correctional system. The amendments to the Corrections Act establishes clear, modern legal framework that allows Alberta's government to enter into interjurisdictional agreements to transfer adult inmates with other provinces and territories, something that did occur when the Northwest Territories came and was evacuated into into Alberta, and there were some issues that were identified, and these are just being rectified, Mr. Speaker. This is basic, good, responsible government. It ensures that we maintain custody and continuity for complex cases during emergencies like floods and wildfires, and Mr. Speaker, it just makes sense. So in closing, this bill is very simple. It's about providing police officers the ability to form a collective bargaining association which is allowed under the Police Officer Collective Bargaining Agreement. This is consistent with all police services in Alberta. Secondly, it is about protecting victims of domestic violence. And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, it is about streamlining the system for corrections in the event of an emergency. Mr. Speaker, I hope everyone in this chamber truly understands how simple this bill is, and I hope that the NDP understands that, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage all members of the House to support this bill. And I once again move third reading of Bill 4, the Public Safety Emergency Services Statute Amendment Act, number 2. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the Deputy Premier and Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services has moved third reading of Bill 4. And I see the honourable member from Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to rise and speak to Bill 4 at third reading and to respond to some of the comments from the minister. To be absolutely clear, as we have said repeatedly, Mr. Speaker, we support the amendments to Clare's Law. We believe those are important. Those need to go through. We support that portion of the bill. We have no issue with the corrections portion of the bill. By all means, that streamlining should be done. We're living in an age where we're going to see more and more wildfires, other emergencies. We need to have the proper protocols in place. We support that. Now, the minister says that, the rest of it, around, the police association, those pieces, and indeed, if you're forming a police service, absolutely, then you need to have a police association. But when the minister says this is simple in common sense, he is badly mistaken. This is not simple. This is another step in this government's choice to create a massive new public agency to take over law enforcement in the province of Alberta, to replace the RCMP at a cost of nearly $1 billion for the transition and nearly $1 billion in operating costs every single year. So is this one small step? Yes, the minister has chosen to take that massive endeavour and spread it out across a number of bills, but the fact is Bill 4 is the next piece, the next step in that endeavour, one with which a broad majority of Albertans have already said they don't support. So the minister is being incredibly disingenuous in suggesting that we should simply support Bill 4. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, we cannot. We made it quite clear when we brought it forward at Committee of the Whole that we supported the Clare's Law amendments and we supported the corrections pieces. So let's be absolutely clear on that piece. So let's take a look at this then, Mr. Speaker, what the minister is saying. Also he took a little bit of a drive-by smear there against the leader of the opposition. Talked about him defunding police. Let's be absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker. The only folks who have ever defunded the Calgary Police Service are the UCP government. From the Calgary Herald, published October 29, 2019, the UCP will hike the province's share of fine revenue from 26.7% to 40%, amounting to $10 million annually that will no longer be returned to the Calgary Police Service.
Shame.
$10 million out of the pockets of the Calgary Police Service that was taken by this government to fill their budget, Mr. Speaker. Wow. The province also, it says, the province will also impose new charges for DNA testing, which could cost CPS up to $2 million annually.
Shame.
So let's clear the record, Mr. Speaker. It was this government, with that minister at the cabinet table, that defunded the Calgary Police Service.
Wow.
Now, I heard one of the members yelling about 2025, at which time the leader of the opposition was far from being the mayor of Calgary. So I'm not quite sure what the Minister of Advanced Education is yelling about. So let's be clear. What we are talking about here, Mr. Speaker, is the continuation of this government's plan to replace the RCMP with an Alberta Provincial Police Service, something they did not campaign on, something they have not consulted on, something for which they have presented no business plan, something for which they have presented no budget or costing. Now,
I didn't have any trouble hearing the minister. I'm just making a wild guess. The opposition might not have agreed with everything the minister said, but it was easy to hear because they didn't say anything. Let's offer the same courtesy to the member from Calgary City Centre, shall we?
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, if the members opposite don't want to take my word for it, perhaps they'll take the word of Kara Westerlund, the current president of the Rural Municipalities Association of Alberta. Now, the minister said he talked to folks at RMA last week. He claims he had support. Table it. Let's see some names. Let's see the folks that are ready to sign on the dotted line and contract with this government for a service which they've yet to actually outline and for which they can't provide any costs. Here's what Kara Westerlund had to say. You heard the minister talk about RCMP or policing services not being used in the municipalities or calls going unanswered. It's interesting because we have seen no plans, no concrete information or data about how they're going to recruit officers, how they're going to deploy the officers. Right now, we just have a lot more questions and concerns, and very valid concerns. The province seems to be pushing ahead and moving forward with their plans, but there's no details. Where's the feasibility studies? Where's the data to prove that what they're proposing is going to be better than what we've got? Absolutely, we all want to increase service levels in our municipalities, but who's going to pay for it? What's it going to look like? What does it mean? She goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, in response to the minister talking about RCMP staffing shortages. She says, you heard the minister talk about shortages of officers, but that's not unique to the RCMP, Calgary Police Service, Edmonton Police Service. Any police service in Alberta, municipal or provincial, are having struggles right across the country. Actually, it's a North America issue of having this recruitment issue. So let's be clear, Mr. Speaker. The very folks who the minister says he is doing this work for, who he says are going to be his customers for this business he is building with no business plan, no cost structure, no budget, are saying they've still got a lot of questions. And this is after a year and a half of legislation, Mr. Speaker. Coming up on 2 years. First bill, Bill 11, came out in spring of 2024. Followed by Bill 49 in the spring of this year, followed by Bill 4 now. And every single time he brings one of these bills in, every time he moves further with actually setting up the infrastructure and planning and all the pieces for his provincial police service, the same people have the same questions and raise the same concerns because the minister isn't talking to them. A casual conversation over a beer at Rural Municipalities of Alberta Association is not the same as actually sitting down with town councils with a detailed business plan, actually answering questions, actually putting numbers on the table. The minister has refused to do that. And when we are talking about nearly $1 billion in taxpayer dollars to transition, nearly $1 billion in operating costs year over year. That's from the government's own report that they commissioned from the PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2021, back when they actually did a semblance of consultation, back when they actually dared to put some numbers on the table, not like the cowardly actions we see from this government now, which bullies legislation through and refuses to be accountable for it or actually put their money where their mouth is. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, Bill 4 is a continuation of disrespect towards rural Albertans, towards the men and women of the RCMP. The minister says he wants to improve service. Well, the fact is this government has been in charge of the EMS system in rural Alberta for 6 years. And we continue to see regular reports of people who nearly die because an ambulance is not available when they call for one, their local emergency department is not open. This government has not solved the problem with recruiting paramedics, or improving service, or improving coverage. Yet they expect us to believe they can stand up this massive new agency and out of the blue take on the work that the RCMP have been doing for decades in this province, and they will magically fix everything, like the Premier fixed health care in 90 days. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, this is not an idle plaything. This is a very serious issue. And if this minister took it seriously, he would be more than just sitting in his ivory tower putting the pieces together. He would actually be out consulting with the community, actually talking to people on the ground. And I'll tell you, when I was at Alberta municipalities, when I talked to people from the RMA, there is still a lot of support for the RCMP. And when the minister suggests that the problem is that the RCMP are the ones that don't want to come to the table and won't commit, let's be absolutely clear. The BC government is in the preparations to already begin those negotiations. And you know what? When the folks in the RCMP talk about the situation, when the gentleman appeared at the public committee with the Canada Senate, what he said is they are beginning those conversations, and all provinces except one have indicated they're interested in renegotiating. Gee, Mr. Speaker, I wonder which one province that is that has already told the RCMP, regardless of the decision that's made by the federal government, even if the federal cabinet makes that final decision to back up what they've been saying, that they are here to renegotiate, it sure sounds like the minister in this government has already told them, no thank you. And that is not what they have been telling Albertans. That is not what they've been telling their municipal partners. They've been telling them all options are on the table. We believe in choice. Mr. Speaker, this government is already planning and pretty far down the road to cutting off that choice for Albertans. So again, the minister is being incredibly disingenuous when he says he is doing this for anyone other than this government and their own political ambitions and interests. Now, the minister says it's laughable to suggest that he will be personally in charge and be able to influence the Alberta Sheriff's Police Service because there will be an independent public body. Let's remember, Mr. Speaker, what this government's record is with respecting the autonomy of independent public bodies. We've got a whole scandal still going through investigation about how this government is quite plausibly alleged to have directly interfered with Alberta Health Services, an independent public body. In fact, the Dynalife report that was just laid on the table by the Auditor General highlights many points at which this government directly interfered with that independent public body to force them to go through with a contract that they were warning this government was going to be disastrous for Albertans, and it was, at a cost of $125 million and a whole lot of people's health and well-being. We've seen this government attempt to basically try to interfere with the Alberta Energy Regulator, with the Alberta Electrical Systems Operator, when they put through their renewables ban. We have seen this government interfere with regulation around coal in this province to force through a coal mine that had already been rejected. We're still figuring out how much that one's going to cost. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, we are paying on multiple fronts for a government which does not have any respect for the rule of law, does not have any respect for conflict of interest. It is not impossible to think that this government would also be more than happy to interfere with the independent operation of a provincial police force. After all, this is a government headed by a premier who was found by the Ethics Commissioner to have broken conflict of interest law in attempting to interfere in a criminal case. That's not conjecture. It's not a fairy tale. It's fact. And this government has only gotten more arrogant and more entitled since, which is evidenced by the fact that they are continuing to push forward this legislation despite the fact that they have not consulted on it. In fact, they just spent this whole past summer with their dog and pony show at the Alberta Next Town Hall talking about, well, maybe we should do this, while they are in fact, or had already moved 2 pieces of legislation to make it happen and are now moving their 3rd. Albertans deserve better, Mr. Speaker. They deserve a government that actually respects them enough not to pull a bait and switch. A government that respects them enough not to put its own interests ahead of theirs. There is no reason any Albertan should trust this government to credibly be able to set up something as complex with something with such a deep impact as a provincial police service. Because they've demonstrated time and time again they can't put their own interest aside in these things. They have no competence in these things. And when they set these things up, they end in disaster at huge cost to Albertans. Albertans deserve an honest reckoning, real consultation, and a government that will actually respect their wishes in how we meet what we acknowledge is a real problem. We do need to do better for rural Alberta. They do have rights. They do deserve better service. But this government, this minister, have shown no credibility that their intended solution is going to get us anywhere close to there. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I will be voting against Bill 4. Because Albertans deserve better. Better than this government, better than their disregard and their disrespect. They deserve a government that will present a real solution for public safety, one that is built in collaboration and in partnership, that is not based on misinformation, baseless accusations against the men and women who proudly serve us in our province now and who have the support of so many Albertans for their work in the RCMP. It's my hope that maybe some of these government members will start listening to the folks in their constituency, to the local rural leaders, the folks who are telling them they want better, and they're not interested in this government-run provincial police force. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On 3rd reading of Bill 4, the honourable member from Calgary, Acadia, and before I sit down, I'll apologize to the previous member for getting this constituency name wrong a little earlier. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise this evening to join the debate on Bill 4, Public Safety Act. And I just want to start by being very clear. Clare's Law saves lives. It is a tool rooted in tragedy and designed to help people identify risks and protect themselves. It deserves attention, it deserves strengthening, it deserves investment and consistency. What it does not deserve is to be tied to a multi-billion-dollar political project Albertans have rejected at every stage, which of course is what we're learning about here in Bill 4, the provincial police force. Clare's Law should not be used as a cover. Survivors should not be used as packaging. And domestic violence prevention should not be used as a lever to push through an agenda that the public has already clearly said no to. And Mr. Speaker, it's especially shameful in that it is the month of November, which is Family Violence Prevention Month. So when we should all be focused on those upstream investments, like supporting survivors, funding shelters, stabilizing housing, ensuring education and early intervention is happening, this government instead has chosen to bring forward yet another attempt to advance the policing agenda that Albertans have consistently rejected. So this is just more of the same, more misplaced priorities, more political sleight of hand, more wasted energy. And we just heard the minister complain that the opposition continues to debate referencing all the real priorities of Albertans instead of directly talking about what's inside this bill. And that's kind of the point, Mr. Speaker. There are certainly aspects of this bill that we support. As I said, Clare's Law, absolutely. And we should strengthen it, and it should not be tied to something that undermines that safety. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know you're aware of this. Albertans send us hundreds, if not thousands, of emails to our constituency offices every single week. Albertans know what's going on in here. They're paying attention. They're tired of the political theatrics. They're tired of watching decisions be made based on ideology rather than evidence. They're tired of instability being framed as leadership or rants from this government about other governments instead of ever taking accountability for their own actions. Albertans want stability, real stability, not the kind that comes only after a government-created chaos. Just look at the state of healthcare. We will not get stability by creating chaos and then congratulating ourselves for sort of cleaning it up. We don't build trust by having, at this point, seemingly weekly, preventable outbreaks in our hospitals or in our long-term care. We don't build confidence in this government when we have influenza rates, and I quote, out of control. If this government truly wanted to talk about public safety, they should be stabilizing healthcare, not destabilizing policing. Some of my colleagues who spoke earlier made some very good points. The member from Calgary Varsity spoke about the sheer waste of resources this bill was bringing forward. Member from Edmonton Manning and from Calgary Klein both noted a sense of deja vu or Groundhog's Day. And yeah, here we are again, as opposition trying to push back on a police force that Alberta simply doesn't want. The member from Edmonton Highlands Norwood highlighted that actual investment looks like upstream supports, community-rooted solutions, evidence-based priorities. But here we are again, same question being asked, and the government refusing to accept the answer. This bill is the political equivalent of asking Albertans the same question over and over and over again and hoping they will eventually give up. Albertans deserve better than being worn down. They deserve to be heard, the first time. If this government really wanted stability to be their talking point, Albertans know better. Stability cannot be claimed after you've disrupted everything else around yourself. The Dynalife fiasco, more than $125 million spent, piled on top of human cost. Preventable outbreaks spreading through our healthcare settings, AISH recipients still falling further behind. Meanwhile, this government upped the monthly allowance for MLAs. They defend skyboxes. Turkish Tylenol still has Albertans shaking their head. Such a waste. But somehow, even though our schools are overcrowded, our teachers are underpaid, and the classrooms are bursting at the seams, when this government could not find money to properly compensate the educators taking care of literally our future, but they could find money for this police force that no one wants. So, Mr. Speaker, I have a strong dislike for waste and redundancy, and this government is building their legacy on it. And we can't ignore the mistreatment of labor in this province. The government claims that we're going to create this new police force. Where are you getting your workforce? As mentioned just moments ago from the member from Edmonton City Centre, this government has proven themselves incapable of securing workforce for the majority of healthcare. Why would Alberta trust them to suddenly be able to do the same elsewhere when they've never been able to before? Now, prevention, of course, begins a long way before police intervention. before Clare's Law begins with housing stability, mental health supports, addiction treatment, childcare, education, newcomer support. I could go on, Mr. Speaker. If, in fact, we wanted to address domestic violence, we wouldn't be focused on the violence piece. We'd be focused on preventing the crisis to start with. Now, briefly, before I pass the baton to my colleagues, just this last weekend, I was witness to a panel discussion talking about the prevention of domestic violence. Now, this is a group of 150 men who all came together to discuss their role in the prevention of domestic violence. Now, the focus and what the answer ended up at every single question, it came back to the same thing. It is all about early interventions. It is about actually meeting people where they're at. And that means investing in those systems, not just throwing good money after bad for something that Albertans don't want. Mandela House, located in the beautiful riding of Calgary-Klein, which is a sister, I guess a brother, nonprofit to Ruth's House, which is located in the beautiful riding of Calgary-Acadia. Mandela House offers Alberta's first ethno-cultural emergency shelter and transitional housing for Black men experiencing homelessness due to family violence. They provide counseling, skill development, and wraparound supports that are grounded in that community. They are just one example of hundreds of underfunded, overstretched frontline organizations that are doing the real work. I would love for Bill 4 to actually be about safety, but I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, it is not about Albertans. It is about a pet project that continues to get pushed by this government. And now all they've done is added a very important Clare's Law into the mix as the sugar to make what they're forcing down Albertans' throat a little easier. That is shameful. And with that, I urge everyone to vote against Bill 4.
The honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in firm opposition of Bill 4 because this legislation misunderstands what safety is, how safety is created, and who must be involved in shaping the systems that govern safety on treaty lands. This government has said Bill 4 is about protecting communities. But, Mr. Speaker, you cannot protect communities if you do not empower them. And you cannot strengthen safety by weakening partnerships, weakening accountability, and slashing prevention programs. Mr. Speaker, I also speak today with over 3 years of experience of sitting on the Edmonton Police Commission, a civilian body legally responsible for governance, oversight, and holding the Chief of Police and the service to account. And my dear late Musham Cecil, he served over 25 years as a member of the RCMP. And between us, nearly 3 decades of practice, oversight, and experience. I know what policing looks like when it works, and I also know what it looks like when it does not. And this bill is taking us in the wrong direction. In fact, it's taking Alberta backwards. I want to begin with our treaty relationship. Treaty is shared governance, shared responsibility, and shared decision-making between the Crown and First Nations, a constitutional relationship affirmed by Section 35 and repeatedly upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada, the Haida case, the Mikisew case, the Chilcotin case, and many others. Mr. Speaker, I know that this government has met with chiefs. Meeting the chiefs is not the issue. The issue is the chiefs have told me that this government heard them but did not respond to what they heard. and definitely did not empower the chiefs. They were promised action, but nothing in writing. They were invited to meetings, but not invited to co-develop the bill. They were given nods, but absolutely no authority, no investment, no shared decision-making, not a single clause that reflects their leadership. Consultation without authority is not treaty implementation. It is colonialism with better catering. When legislation reshapes policing, emergency services, and public safety, powers all systems that they disproportionately impact Indigenous peoples. First Nations cannot simply be participants. We must be partners. Bill 4 ignores that fundamental truth. Mr. Speaker, Bill 4 expands policing and emergency service powers, but it does not expand Indigenous civilian oversight, community governance over safety, public accountability measures, or transparent reporting requirements. Dr. Michelle Lawrence calls this, quote, authority creep, end quote, the steady expansion of state power while the checks on power remain completely frozen. And we know where that leads, Mr. Speaker. Racialized enforcement, over-policing of Indigenous peoples, and declining of Albertans' trust. First Nations and Métis people are a very small percentage of Alberta's population, but we fill the jails. We are the unhoused, and we are the ones in a mental health crisis. And when you expand enforcement in a society marked with inequity rooted in colonialism, all this government is doing with this bill is expanding inequality. Bill 4 fails to acknowledge this reality, Mr. Speaker. It contradicts the spirit and the intention and the requirements of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. You see, this declaration requires free, prior, and informed consent on laws affecting Indigenous peoples. In fact, this government can read it themselves, Article 19. The protection of Indigenous women with disabilities and persons with disabilities, Article 22. And Indigenous participation in administering programs related to justice and safety, Article 23. Let me remind this UCP government that a conversation is not consent. And to be crystal clear, a briefing is not a partnership, and a promise without paper is not implementation. The United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples calls for co-development, not after-the-fact notification. Bill 4 falls dramatically short, embarrassing so. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls told us very plainly, public safety systems in Canada continue to fail Indigenous women. Yet this bill expands power without addressing the systemic failures we already know too well as Indigenous women. And Mr. Speaker, this UCP government cannot stand in this House and declare at the top of their lungs, I might add, that just because they say it loud, it doesn't make it so, repeatedly asserting to protect vulnerable people while ignoring the systems that place them in the risk in the first place. Elders, chiefs, and scholars warned us decades ago in the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples in the 1980s, when the mechanisms of colonialism are left without oversight or partnership, they do exactly what they're designed to do, and that is perpetuate genocide. Mr. Speaker, sadly, this bill strengthens the wrong tools. The most essential piece of public safety, the one missing entirely in this bill, is prevention. Alberta does not have a policing crisis. Alberta has a prevention negligence. completely created by this UCP government's decisions. The evidence is overwhelming in the research. Housing reduced police contacts by over 70%. Supportive housing reduces emergency use like EMS and paramedics and firefighters by over 70%. Housing First reduces justice involvement by up to 50%. Calgary Homeless Foundation shows that housing saves $34,000 per person per year in justice and in health costs. Mr. Speaker, you cannot argue with the basic simple math. When government cuts prevention, like this UCP government does, the police get the call. No youth supports, the police get the call. No detox beds, the police get the call. No mental health care, the police get the call. No housing, the police get the call. No place to defecate, the police get the call. No place to urinate, the police get the call. Police are responding to failures created by decisions made by this UCP government. And instead of fixing the root causes, Bill 4 adds more power where the problem cannot be solved, just simply perpetuated. Mr. Speaker, international jurisdictions have reduced crime, and they did it with one simple common sense thing. They all invested in prevention, not enforcement. Portugal, research it. Finland, look at it. Scotland, read about it. Housing cities focused across the United States of America and Indigenous nations across Turtle Island using restorative justice and land-based healing. The pattern is crystal clear, Mr. Speaker. When people have supports, when people have culture, when they have stability and treatment, and they stop interacting with police on those issues, you create safety. If this government had invested in supportive housing, mental health care, youth services, treatment, there would be no need for Bill 4 and no talk of these modern jails framed as compassionate care. You know, Mr. Speaker, safety is created by stability, not by force. This bill consolidates provincial authority instead of empowering. Instead of empowering the municipalities, like you heard from my friend, instead of empowering treaty nations, instead of empowering Indigenous-led safety models or community organizations, we could have had a bill that was co-developed with municipalities, with First Nations, with women who experience domestic violence. But rather, we just have a bill coming from an authoritarian that is going to do absolutely no good to First Nations and Métis individuals. Hi, nanaskaman, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Glenmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on Bill 4, the bill that continues with this experiment of a provincial police force. This is the $2 billion for New Police Badges Act, Mr. Speaker. This legislation advances the next step of establishing the Alberta Sheriff's Police Service. Mr. Speaker, rural Albertans deserve genuine solutions to their safety concerns, not expensive bureaucratic experiments. Rural Albertans have serious public safety concerns. We acknowledge this, and this bill does not solve them. The UCP is continuing with this policing project with no public mandate, no detailed cost breakdown, and no credible evidence it would enhance safety. Mr. Speaker, Alberta's communities thrive when we listen to local voices and prioritize real public safety needs. The UCP is forcing through massive police restructuring that nobody in Alberta has asked for or wants. Albertans have repeatedly rejected this plan. So how does the government justify proceeding with establishing this framework for a provincial police service when 86% of Albertans want to retain the RCMP? How does the government justify that the rural municipalities will pay 82% of this massive cost? And don't take my word for it. Paul McLaughlin, the Reeve from Ponoka County and the former president of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, did the math for you, Mr. Speaker. And I quote here Mr. McLaughlin's op-ed titled, "Stop Downloading Expenses onto Alberta's Municipalities." So I quote him here. "With all the rhetoric related to unity, tariffs, and other multiple black swans that have occurred in society today, I want to assert the right of municipalities to exist, unfettered by the actions of the provincial government. I will take, for example, the ultimate downloading that has ever existed in the history of municipalities in Alberta, aside from dumping bridges on us. The 2024-2025 police funding model numbers have been updated to Ponoka County to the tune of $776,302. Ponoka County had a population of 10,428 in 2024, and that expense is $74.44 per person. Importantly, there has been no change in service when the police funding model was created. But wait, we are not talking per capita here. We are instead talking about assessment. So this is where it gets stupid. Ponoka County has a tax bill of $21 million based upon $3.7 billion of assessment. Now, if you've ever been to Ponoka County, you would know that farmland is what we are, with beautiful rolling hills, fat cattle, wheat fields, and canola. It is beautiful, I've been there. Our total municipal tax for assessed farmland is $639,150, and residential is $4,112,522. Just the policing download alone is 112% of farmland, or 16% of the residential tax. I want that to sink in. End quote. He goes on then and he does more math for the province. This reef from Ponoka urges the government to stop the download to municipalities. And he ends this op-ed with, and I quote here, "You want to grow Alberta's economy with rural Alberta? Stay out of our way. In my 18 years of elected office, I have never been treated as a child of the provincial government, until now. I have never seen such a large provincial download until now. Enjoy your personal tax cut, Albertans. Check out your municipal property taxes to find out where the money came from." To quote the Minister of Alberta's municipalities, "They are not required to be happy with the decisions that we make." End quote. Maybe the MLA from Ponoka should take some notes today. Mr. Speaker, the rural municipalities of Alberta have expressed the rejection of this provincial police force, specifically when Bill 49 was released. And I quote here, "Unfortunately, the government of Alberta has yet to engage municipalities on how this policing service may be a solution to addressing policing challenges." End quote. And Elizabeth Manas from Calgary Glenmore emailed my office and literally tells us, and I quote here, "Please work on issues that are actually important to Albertans, like the cost of living crisis, affordable housing and groceries, adding jobs, making healthcare wait lists shorter, and adding teachers to classrooms, and stop trying to emulate the social conservatism that is happening in America." End quote. Mr. Speaker, rural leaders have rejected this plan. This is not serious. Polling after polling after polling tells us that Albertans prefer to keep the RCMP. The government has failed to engage municipalities and local leaders in rural Alberta in a meaningful way. And they reject this costly plan. This bill is another excuse to create another crown corporation. And I really do not understand this obsession, this UCP obsession with crown corporations, Mr. Speaker. How many do we actually have now? 5, 6? Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Police Force is an experiment. It is a duplication and a waste of public money, taxpayer money. So why isn't the UCP listening? Why are they spending $2 billion on new police badges while Albertans are treading water with the cost of living, cost of groceries, cost of rent, and housing? Albertans have rejected this plan. The UCP should focus on Albertans' priorities And I'm going to end with a quote from Tom, a constituent of Calgary Glenmore, who says, and I quote again, "More than 80% of Albertans polled on this issue agree. We do not support replacing the RCMP with an unproven, unnecessary, and untested new provincial police service. By launching the Alberta Sheriff's Police Service, it is clear you are not listening to or consulting us, the people who rely on the RCMP to stay safe. This idea has been raised before, and every time Albertans have pushed back. In 2021, your government's own report from PricewaterhouseCoopers showed that a new provincial police service would cost hundreds of millions to create. This time, there's no report, no plan, and no real consultation with Albertans, the ones who will be footing the bill." End quote. The UCP should listen to Albertans, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I cannot support this bill.
The honourable member for Calgary, Boular-McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak briefly to Public Safety and Emergency Services Statute Amendment Act 2025. And at the beginning of my remarks, I want to state that on the side of the House, we fully support the changes and amendments insofar they relate to Clare's Law. They protect victims and survivors of the domestic violence. Myself and all my colleagues fully support that part of this legislation. Minister, in his remarks, made a lot of absurd claims, saying that NDP wants to cut victim services. In fact, that was UCP government that raided victim services, took the money from victims, dismantled the existing victim services, which nobody was asking for them, and still victims are struggling to find the support they used to get from victim services. Again, they also made claims around NDP cutting police budget. In fact, that was the UCP first government in the history of this province who cut almost $13 million in 2019 budget from Calgary Police alone. Then I think other changes, Minister said, are common sense that are contained in this bill. Quite frankly, they are not common sense, they are nonsense, which nobody is asking for. And before 2023 election, it used to be in Minister of Justice mandate letter to look for the policing options, Alberta Police Force. And before the election, they took that out of Minister of Justice mandate letter. And during the election, they didn't talk much about this Alberta Police Force. And as soon as they got elected, they started, I guess, betraying the social contract they entered into with Albertan during that election. And they never got mandate from Albertans to dismantle the RCMP in favor of a UCP police force. And prior to that, before 2023, they also commissioned a report, PwC report, PricewaterhouseCoopers report, which outlined what will it take to replace the RCMP with an Alberta police force. It was very clear that they will at least need $360+ million in just startup costs. And Alberta will also be losing the $170-some million that federal government pays for the RCMP. So in total, the price was pegged at $734 to $754 million to dismantle RCMP and replace it with a UCP police force. At that time, I think before going into election, the UCP put that file on the back burner. Those numbers were too high. They didn't talk to Albertans about it. And many in Alberta municipalities, many in rural Alberta, RMA, rural municipalities of Alberta, both organizations representing rural municipalities, they were against the UCP plan to dismantle the RCMP. However, they are doing it in the name of public safety. They, I'm sure, know that they cannot police themselves out of the concerns, public safety concerns facing Albertans. All police chiefs will tell them that. Expert on public safety will tell them that. And there is huge body of literature and research out there that if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to address public safety concern, you have to focus on the social determinants of justice.
Yes.
And those social determinants of justice include income, employment, education, housing stability, and healthcare, as well as issues of racism and discrimination that can also lead to discrepancies in legal system, in justice system, lead to over-policing and access to resources such as fair representation. So when you look at the UCP record on these fronts on social determinants of justice, I think Albertans are struggling to make ends meet. Their income have been stagnant, in particular for those earning minimum wage since October 2018. If you look at employment, we have seen employment go through the roof. Alberta cities, major cities like Calgary and Edmonton are among the cities which have the highest unemployment. If we look at youth employment, it's at the record levels. We have not seen this kind of youth unemployment in this province ever before. If you look at education, Alberta is funding public education at the lowest level in the entire country.
Shame.
If you look at housing stability, we have seen houselessness in our major cities, in even rural communities under this government watch. And they will get up and talk about, Minister will refer to that Alberta has turned into Mecca of housing startups. I don't know what that means, but houselessness has never been this bad as it is now in this province. And when you look at healthcare, just today, they introduced a bill that will create a two-tier healthcare system, American-style healthcare system, will make it more difficult for people to access healthcare, mental health services, and all that.
That's right.
If seriously UCP wants to be taken seriously on public safety front, they need to be investing in social determinants of justice, which they have completely ignored. And last thing I would say that we have talked about this plan. We do know that it's a costly plan. We do know that municipalities do not want it. And more importantly, we do know that it will not help us improve public safety. Changing uniforms, color of uniforms, or stickers on the cars will not help us with public safety. From day one, the UCP policy has been and continues to be political grandstanding and shifting blame onto others. They talk about bail reforms. Sure, I agree that bail system need to be reformed, but what they never tell Albertans that our jail house 70% of people who are in pretrial detention, meaning that they don't get bail hearing in the time mandated by the legislation. Those things need to be addressed, but UCP will never focus on that. Other thing is that we also know that our justice system over-detains Indigenous people, Black people, person of color people. UCP will never talk about it. Instead, they might add some dog whistle in their throne speech, blaming immigrants for a lot of the issues that are a direct result of UCP policies. So in short, I will say that this bill will not help us address public safety. If UCP members, if UCP backbenchers are serious about public safety, they need to be pushing their government to invest in employment, education, healthcare, housing stability, and in policies that address racism and discrimination in this province. And at least I hope that those members who have been recalled, they would take their job seriously and they would try to listen to Albertan, at least this time, on this front. I urge all members to vote against this bill. And again, I reiterate my support for the Clares Law section of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Northeast.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Inderpal Singh came home from a long Uber shift on late night of June 4, 2025 and parked his car in driveway. He was tired but happy to meet his pregnant wife waiting to meet her husband. They were expecting a baby in few days. The baby's cot was ready. They had bought nappies, baby suits, and maternity bag was ready by the door, ready to go. Then, all of a sudden, gunshots were fired. Neighbors were terrified. Terror ran through the street. His pregnant wife came outside. She saw something she would not have imagined in her wildest dreams or worst nightmares. Inderpal was lying in his car full of blood. She screamed for help. She begged for help. Her neighbors came and called 911. Help arrived and they tried to give him CPR. They could not save him. He was declared dead. A caring father, a hardworking son, and a loving father. Life lost to gun violence. A baby who was yet to be born lost a father. The community was in shock, in mourning, and left numb. No words can express the grief of the family, the pain of the community, and pointlessness of the crime. Albertans have never felt this unsafe. Gang violence, gun violence, gender-based violence, all are on the rise. In Calgary, by the end of 2024, domestic violence victims were 14% above the 5-year average. 14%, Mr. Speaker. For intimate partner violence in Canada, women, girls account for about 78% of victims in 2023. In Calgary, the picture is terrifying. Violent crimes up 11.3% in 2023. Non-domestic robberies up 8%. Weapon-related incidents up 12%. In Edmonton, the picture is equally concerning. Over 16,000 crimes in 2023. 16,000 violent crimes, up 6.6% from the previous year, with gun incidents alone up 16%. More weapons, more threat to Albertan security, more unsafe streets, homes, and communities. Enough of rising crime, enough of broken promises, and enough of government failure. And this bill fails to deliver the core principle of Alberta Advantage, safety. Albertans deserve to feel safe in their homes, in their communities, in the places of worship. Lives, properties, and communities must be safe. And my constituents are telling me they do not feel safe, Mr. Speaker. They send me videos of cars being stolen, homes being set on fire, gunshots on homes. They tell me that they have never seen a crime outbreak like this. They call it a crime epidemic. And they ask me, what are we going to do to make things better? How do we create safer, more secure, and more stable society? and this bill fails to address those questions, Mr. Speaker. However, there are three vital ways that we can cure this problem. The first is crime prevention programs. We know that investing in our communities is the best investment we can make. We can invest in gang intervention and youth violence programs. Comprehensive gang intervention programs combine targeted enforcement with community-led prevention. These initiatives not only identify the individuals driving a majority of violent crimes, they offer supports like exit strategies, job training, and counseling. These focused deterrence programs are delivered in partnership with police, social service, and community leaders. One of the most famous gang violence reduction strategies is Operation Ceasefire in Boston. In the mid-1990s, a working group of Boston police, federal agents, probation officers, and community street workers implemented this program. Not only they told gang members to end violence, they offered job referrals and social services. The results were dramatic. 63% reduction in youth homicide victimization. Cincinnati did the same thing. The city introduced Cincinnati Initiative to Reduce Violence, involving police, community volunteers, and social services. Results, Mr. Speaker, 41% reduction in group-related homicides. Stockton, California launched Operation Peacekeeper, including street outreach workers to mentor gang-prone youth alongside focused police work. Gun homicides reduced by 42%. The second element is ending domestic violence. All women must feel safe at homes, at work, and in communities. Clare's Law is one way to make sure they get the information they need about their partners. Strengthening this law means strengthening our society. A society where a woman is safe is the society that reaches the heights of progress. Canada as a country and Alberta as a province have a lot to do to make women more safe. Claire Wood was murdered in 2009 by her ex-boyfriend with multiple prison sentences on domestic violence. When Claire repeatedly asked the police for help, they had no legal means to share the information. If this law would have existed in 2009, Claire's life could have saved. I'm glad that we are making progress on this so we can save so many other Claires of our society. The third element is keep the RCMP. 1,911 RCMP cover the 99% of Alberta's geography, 660,000 square kilometers. 97% of calls are answered within 2 minutes. And guess how many under 1 minute, Mr. Speaker? 87%. More and more Canadians want to join the RCMP and serve our communities. Last year alone, 17,500 RCMP applications were received. Over 3,000 of those applicants were Albertans, the highest in over a decade. If there is anything that needs to be changed, it's this UCP government. This government has wrong priorities, wrong policies, and wrong people in charge. UCP is focused on making changes that give them more power, not what is right to do for Albertans. Sometimes they attack Canada Pension Plan, the other time Canada Revenue Agency, and now it's RCMP. Albertans have said no to all these policies multiple times. UCP is the cause of this sickness in our society. We cannot possibly look to them to administer this cure. To the Minister of Public Safety, who thinks replacing RCMP will solve the problem, I say keep your ears on the ground and listen to what Albertans have to say. Feel the pain of our communities. Open your eyes and see the failing communities. 76% of Albertans in RCMP-served communities remain satisfied with the policing services they receive. 71% they say the public has not been properly consulted about replacing RCMP. 81% agree there are more important priorities for the province than changing these policing policies. During the Bill 4 presser, the minister stated that he believed he witnessed strong support to move forward on this at the Alberta Next Panel's town halls. These events and straw polls could hardly be described as accurate representation of the province, Mr. Speaker. Let me share what rural municipalities of Alberta President Cara Westerlund has to say. She said it's important for anyone starting conversations about policing changes to represent accurate information. She said, and I quote, "We don't have a policing problem in this province. We have a judicial problem," end quote. UCP is more concerned with appearance than reality, more worried about creating the illusion that they are tackling crime, lest having limited impact as crime continues to go up, hurting everyone. We have big problems in Alberta today, and we need to recognize their huge scale with an equally huge response. I want to share a quote of Nelson Mandela. "Safety and security don't just happen. They are the result of collective, conscious and public investment in fairness, opportunity and justice." We can put crime to end. We can put domestic violence to end. And we can put wrong priorities of UCP to end. To end crime, to end domestic violence, to end UCP's reckless priorities, we must end the UCP. And come 2027, Albertans will put this government to end. No more chaos, no more corruption, no more cruelty. We can build a better future, Mr. Speaker. We can give people life of dignity, respect, and hope. We can make our communities safe so no Inderpal Singh ever lose life to gun violence, no wife lose a husband, and no yet to be born baby lose a father. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Any other speakers wishing to speak? Have the opportunity for the Honourable Deputy Premier, Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services to close debate. We waive that. The Honourable Deputy Premier, Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services has moved third reading of Bill 4, Public Safety and Emergency Services Statutes Amendment Act 2025, number 2. Those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That motion is carried, and we have a division call in the members, please. Members, the Honourable Member of Public Safety and Emergency Services has moved third reading of Bill 4. If you are in favour, please stand up.
Honourable Mr. Sigurdsson, Honourable Mr. Nicolaides, Honourable Ms. Schultz, Honourable Mr. Williams, Honourable Mr. Glubish, Honourable Minister LaGrange, Honourable Mr. Horner, Honourable Mr. Scow, Honourable Mr. Ellis, Honourable Mr. Amory, Honourable Mr. Newdorf, Honourable Mr. Lowen, Honourable Mr. Wilson, Honourable Mr. Jean, Honourable Mr. Dreeshen, Honourable Mr. Nixon, Mr. Wright, Mr. Rosewell, Honourable Mr. Turton, Honourable Mr. Yassine, Honourable Ms. Furr, Honourable Mr. Jones, Honourable Mrs. Sani, Honourable Mr. Hunter, Honourable Mr. Nally, Honourable Mr. Long, Honourable Mr. Boychenko, Mr. Steffen, Mr. Van Dyken, Ms. Pitt, Mr. Sear, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Weeb, Mrs. Sawyer, Mr. Getson, Mrs. Petrovic, Mr. Lunty, Mr. Yao, Mr. Dick, Honourable Ms. Armstrong-Hominock, Ms. de Jong, Mr. Bouchard, Mr. Singh, Ms. Lovely.
Honourable Members, if you are opposed to third reading of Bill 4, please now stand.
Honourable Mr. Sabir, Honourable Member Hoffman, Member Ellingson, Member Calahoo Stonehouse, Mr. Shepherd, Ms. Wright, Ms. Chapman, Mr. Ip, Member Batten, Mr. Gutejbrar. He's not in his seat. No. Honourable Member Ceci, Mr. Dack.
Mr. Speaker, total for the motion 44, total against 12.
The motion is defeated. Oh no, it's carried. Sorry, folks. No, you know what? I did bad. No. This is a mea culpa. The motion is definitely carried. And my apologies.
Bill 4, Public Safety and Emergency Services Statutes Amendment Act 2025 is now read a third time. Government Bills and Orders for second reading Bill 6, Education, Prioritizing Literacy and Numeracy Amendment Act 2025 number 2. Adjourned debate on amendment. Honourable Ms. Ganley.
The Honourable. Oh, okay. Sorry, there's people popping up. I didn't know who was talking. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Beddington.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Motion defeated, motion carried. I get it. It's evening time. You know, are we on Bill 6 or we're on 6, 7? No, 6. 6? 6 amendment. I actually told my kids I would do that in here, so boom, check, done. All right, so on to some actual business. So just a review for folks. I can tell I've got a real captive audience here too. That the amendment that we're on this bill asks that the bill be not now read a second time, as the proposed screening, assessment, and reporting requirements are ableist and will leave behind in their education thousands of children in Alberta who are already struggling in overcrowded and under-supported classrooms in the public education system. So why did we need this amendment, Mr. Speaker? We have major concerns on this side of the House that this government is disregarding teachers' assessments of what's going on with the kids in their classroom. By standardizing these tests, these screeners, whatever you want to call it, literacy, numeracy assessments, by requiring that teachers deliver these tests to all children, well, that has a disproportionate effect on certain children. So in this case, we could be talking about children with ADHD, children with autism spectrum disorder, children with anxiety. And Mr. Speaker, we know that this is a segment of Alberta's student population that is growing. I'm going to pick on one school board simply because I happen to have their fact sheet close to hand here, but this is reflected certainly across all of our urban boards. Calgary Catholic School District estimates that, well, not estimates, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I misspoke there. Calgary School District has the facts and figures to show that 1 in 3 students in the school board has complex learning needs. So when we talk about these assessments being ableist, we are talking about something that has an impact on an enormous number of students. On the teachers' assessments, it's been a real theme I have found for this government. Certainly we've seen it over the last few months, a disrespect really for teachers, for the expertise they provide, for what their professional duty is in the classroom. I want to just share a little bit about what some teachers have shared, sort of a broad level, from some data that the ATA has collected from feedback from, and this is just from elementary school teachers, of course, because these assessments are, we're talking about the K-3 students. 3 in 4 teachers have concerns about the assessments. And what their concerns are, kind of had 3 main categories that teachers identified. 71% believe that the material in the screeners is developmentally inappropriate. And of course have heard a number of reports from teachers on, particularly when we're looking at some of the vocabulary lists and the literacy screeners, that there are words on there that simply haven't been introduced to kids in these age groups yet. I mean, you know, when we're looking at the kindergarten list, I was just talking to a colleague about this. This is, I mean, you know, kids come into kindergarten, some of them with nothing, right? These are kids who still need help zipping their jackets and opening their granola bars. They're learning the foundations of literacy here. And so developmental inappropriateness, 73% of teachers believed that these assessments were harming elementary students. So this is reporting a negative impact on students' emotional well-being and high levels of anxiety. And that's related to the mandatory nature of the testing, Mr. Speaker. And 75% of teachers, low value for student learning. So teachers the feeling is that repeating the test throughout the year, in particular, has no value at all for their students. On assessments generally, I do love how thorough teachers are in the feedback they provide, and I do hope that the minister has reviewed the content, of course, that teachers have provided through the ATA about assessments. So, a declaration on assessment, this is from the ATA. We, the teachers and school leaders of Alberta, believe assessment is about enhancing student learning. So its first task is to inform and help students grow, and then to aid in teaching and learning. Teachers are the assessment experts. And that makes sense, of course, Mr. Speaker. Teachers are frontline workers in the classroom. They are the ones who know their children, who understand what is developmentally appropriate for the class that's in front of them. And there's a strong feeling that teachers should take the lead in designing, implementing, interpreting, and communicating the evidence of learning. And all of that tracks for me. And it is a piece that I believe is missing from this current set of assessments. On that ableism or inclusion angle, assessments must be fair, engaging, and inclusive, giving every learner multiple ways to demonstrate growth. And that is seriously lacking with these assessments because, again, this is a standardized set of assessments. This is delivered to every child, regardless of where they are in their learning journey. And there is no space, as I understand it, for any kind of adaptation to the student that's in front of a teacher, which is a shame, because it's the teacher who knows, right? Who knows what it is that that student is capable of, where they might have the capacity to be challenged, but where they already know that they need support. And that's the fundamental flaw in what this bill is proposing, of course, is that testing, without providing the resources that are needed to support the outcomes of those tests, is a completely meaningless exercise. And we've been doing that meaningless exercise with these literacy numeracy assessments for a number of years now. I think we're on 3 years that these assessments have been in use in the classrooms. It does not appear to have informed this government's decisions when it comes to budgeting. Because certainly we know that we don't have the kind of resources that we need in our classrooms right now for complex learners. So I ask the question, and I look forward to hearing the minister's answer at another stage in this bill debate. What is the exercise of collecting this data for? Why are we collecting all this data on Alberta students? Because it's not being used to inform the resources that we need in the classroom. That much is clear. So what is it for? What are we doing this for? I have actually a surprising number of emails about Bill 6, Mr. Speaker. But I have a great one from Catherine that I just wanted to read a little section of. Catherine writes to voice concern with Bill 6, which requires testing and evaluation, without also providing supports for kids who may not perform well and require early intervention. There are already too many kids not receiving the proper support due to funding cuts in public education from 2019 to 2025. Catherine also asked for the minister to sit down and to speak with educators working in the public system and ask them what would actually help, and asks him to then write a bill about that, which I think is a great suggestion, Catherine. Thank you. Thank you so much for writing in. I'm going to pick on another school board because CBE actually produced a great resource to talk about what that complexity piece looks like in the classroom right now. And I'm so thankful that school boards, and of course, I mean, I know the government supports the free speech of school boards and trustees, and certainly I know that they would never do anything to limit the ability of school boards to communicate with the public. And so I thank the school boards for doing so, because we're left in the dark a lot of the time, Mr. Speaker, about what exactly is going on in our classrooms, because of course the government decided not to track or report any data on that. So CBE has a really nice little resource specifically talking about funding complexity in schools. So over the past 4 years, the number of students with special education needs in the CBE has grown by 3,400 students. So they now have 27,000 students in the system with special education needs. And again, these are only the coded children. There are, of course, a number of children whose parents don't have deep enough pockets to pay for the assessment required to get them a coding. And of course, public schools have long been bereft of the funds that would be required to pay for that for the families who can't afford to pay for that out of pocket. So the actual number is still a little bit of a mystery to us. So for CBE, it works out to about 1 in 5. So about 19% have specialized learning needs. And again, Mr. Speaker, that's in this amendment, we're talking about the ableism, the inclusion needs in our classrooms here. So these are the kids, 20% or 19%, I'm sorry, have these specialized learning needs. Over 7,000 CBE elementary students, so right in this range of K to 3 we're talking about, are identified with ADHD, specific learning disabilities, or both. So over 7,000 students who are going to be actively harmed by these literacy and numeracy assessments, Mr. Speaker. Now, if we want to look at what is actually required to fund complexity, because certainly this is a question that I get a lot, and I don't have the resources of a ministry behind me to answer the question, what would be required? What's that magic dollar number that we need to address complexity? Well, CBE very nicely did the math for me here. So this is just a single school board, now the biggest school board in the province, of course, but their estimate is 148 million more. That's what they need to address complexity. So that's funding to support students with severe learning environments, severe learning needs in some specialized environments. 50 million more to support complexity in the regular classroom, because of course we have children ranging a spectrum in the complexity of their need, from severe, who are maybe going to require those specialized environments, but then mild and moderate, who can probably be accommodated in a standard classroom, but with some supports. 30 million more, now this is specific to fund infrastructure to support neurodiverse learners, because of course these are learners who really work a lot better in a more controlled environment. And then 18 million more to transport students with complex learning needs. This was one of the most interesting things to me. Transporting students with complex learning needs. So first of all, costs for transportation have increased 43% over the last 6 years. And no, the government's funding grant for transportation has certainly not increased 43% over the past 6 years. So what the transportation grant provided by this government gives to CBE is $13 million. The actual cost of transporting students is $31 million. So where does that extra, I want to say 27, but I'm wrong, it's 17. Where does that extra $17 million come from? Well, that comes right out of parents' pockets, of course. So at a time where Albertans are struggling, they're struggling to keep their head above water. We have major issues in terms of cost of living. We have a government that's not addressing, not pulling the levers that they could to bring down costs on insurance, on utilities. Well, and they're certainly not doing anything to bring down costs on student transportation, Mr. Speaker, because they're not providing anywhere close. They're not even providing half of what it costs to transport students. Redirection of the funding, this $50 million to support students in specialized ran out of time.
Thank you. On Amendment RA1, I will recognize the Minister of Education and Childcare.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Happy to rise today to speak to the amendment on Bill 6. I'm rising and encouraging members to vote in opposition to the amendment brought forward regarding Bill 6 here. It's really quite interesting. The amendment that the opposition has brought forward, that they've tabled, claims that Bill 6 is ableist because it mandates universal screening. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I think it's profound and cruel misunderstanding of the moral and scientific imperative that really underpins the legislation that we've brought before this Assembly. So I want to talk a little bit more about why that is and what is truly ableist. I really ask that question in a little bit of a rhetorical way, but I wonder, is the act of shining a light on a barrier to learning so that we can tear it down, is that ableist, Mr. Speaker? Or is it the act of condemning a child to years of academic struggle, emotional pain, and falling further behind simply because we chose to remain blind to their needs? This bill is not about labeling children at all, Mr. Speaker. It's about liberating them. It's about helping them and empowering them to succeed. It's about fulfilling our fundamental responsibility to ensure that every child in this province has a fair start, regardless of what they bring to the table. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is the very definition of pro-equity and pro-child legislation. We're not legislating a challenge, we're legislating the remedy for a challenge. We must, of course, defeat this amendment and allow Bill 6 to proceed. The core of our argument, Mr. Speaker, and the reason the opposition amendment cannot stand is because it's rooted in a lot of irrefutable data and on the benefits of early intervention. The debate is not a matter of ideology, it's a matter of science, Mr. Speaker. Learning difficulties like dyslexia are neurological. Differences in, they're manifested in differences, of course, in processing language sounds. And the science is really crystal clear on this matter. The window for effective intervention is really narrow in those circumstances. We know that the brain is most receptive to literacy intervention in the early years. Scientific evidence is quite unanimous in this regard. More specifically, before the age of 8, that is our window to act. That is our window where we can have the most impact. Research from leading experts demonstrates that outcomes for reading skills are almost twice as good for children who receive targeted support in grade 1 and 2 compared to those who wait until grade 3. The earlier that we are able to provide an intervention, the better, of course, for the children. Now, what does it mean if we just waited until grade 3, Mr. Speaker? It means that a child has endured 3 years of failure. 3 years of sitting in a classroom, watching their peers read effortlessly while they struggle, internalizing the crushing belief that they are not smart enough. By delaying identification, we are not protecting a student, we are inflicting what experts call cumulative problems, including significant anxiety, depression, and a loss of self-esteem that can take years of costly therapy to repair. We have a moral duty, Mr. Speaker, to intervene early. The real fear is not that dyslexic people have to struggle with jumbled input, but that they will quit on themselves before they even get out of school. Our goal is to ensure that they never reach that point of despair. Now, Mr. Speaker, I must directly address the opposition's intellectual dishonesty claim that this bill is ableist. This is a claim made without facts, without empathy, and without consultation with the very people who stand to benefit the most. To claim that identifying a learning barrier so that we can immediately apply evidence-based support is ableist, it just defies logic, Mr. Speaker. What the opposition is advocating for is for the status quo. This destructive wait-to-fail model is the truly ableist policy. The wait-to-fail model reserves help only for children who have struggled so profoundly that they are demonstrably behind their peers. That model is inherently inequitable. It exclusively benefits those with the means to afford private screening and tutoring, leaving low-income families and those in rural areas to languish, such as those in your riding, Mr. Speaker. They are the ones who truly suffer under our current regime. Bill 6, through universal accessible screening, is the ultimate equalizer. It says that regardless of your postal code, regardless of your parents' bank account, we, the Alberta government, will identify your needs and provide you with scientifically backed tools to help you succeed. This bill does not create disability, it recognizes a reality and finds solutions. Mr. Speaker, if you truly want to support all abilities, you must support the ability to read, the ability to learn, and the ability to thrive. The opposition's claim is further discredited by broad, nonpartisan support that this approach has generated across Canada. This is not a rogue initiative that was dreamt up in a vacuum. It is a common-sense policy built on best practices and embraced by leading advocacy organizations. I can tell the Assembly that unequivocally Dyslexia Canada supports our work in this legislation. Their Executive Director, Alicia Smith, has publicly called early screening, quote, a game changer, end quote, and, quote, a significant step forward, end quote, towards literacy equity. When the leading national advocacy voice for dyslexia is standing behind us, How can the opposition claim to be speaking for the vulnerable? They, in fact, are actively undermining the very people they claim to protect. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we are not acting in isolation. This work with respect to screening, literacy, and numeracy has now become a national movement. Our colleagues in the Manitoba legislature have passed similar legislation. Bill 225, establishing universal early reading screening for students from kindergarten through grade 4, was passed unanimously by their legislative assembly. British Columbia also mandated literacy and numeracy screening from K to 3, and very recently, officials from the government of Saskatchewan have reached out to Alberta to get more information about our approach to literacy and numeracy screening. This is a common sense, compassionate approach now being adopted by governments across the country.
Sounds good.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, let us address the opposition's insinuation that this bill mandates a rigid or uncaring approach. That is simply false and untrue. This bill is built on flexibility and professional discretion. The legislation specifically ensures that school boards, through their principals, retain the power to exempt any student from screening that they feel it is clinically or educationally inappropriate. For students with severe pre-existing diagnoses or those with significant language barriers where screening would be irrelevant or harmful, that professional judgment remains intact. This exemption proves that the intent is not blanket enforcement but targeted, caring identification informed by professional judgment. Mr. Speaker, we've heard the science. Early intervention is twice as effective. We have demonstrated the moral failure of the wait to fail approach. We have shown the broad consensus among advocates and other provinces across Canada. To those children who spend their evenings anxious about reading aloud, who hide their report cards, and who believe they are lazy or stupid, we say no, and we say no more. We see you, we understand you, and we are legislating the support that you deserve. The opposition's amendment is a distraction. It is rooted in fear and ignorance, not in the reality of what is best for our children. I urge every member of the Assembly to reject their ableist amendment and vote for a bill that prioritizes literacy, numeracy, and most importantly, the success of every child in this province. I encourage members to reject the amendment, pass Bill 6 to give every student the gift of literacy and the opportunity to unlock their full and brilliant potential. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Glenora.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to rise tonight and speak to Bill 6 and to hopefully create an opportunity to reach across the aisle in speaking to the reasoned amendment and convince a few folks that maybe they have the opportunity to be enlightened through this amendment and consider it as well. Because what the minister just said around wanting early intervention, wanting to have literacy and numeracy as a foundation, every educator and this caucus believes in that. What this bill does, though, is no such thing around early intervention. This bill is around assessment and assessment alone. If the minister truly, through you, Mr. Speaker, wanted to enhance opportunities for early intervention, low enrollment in kindergarten and grade 1, the minister would have sat down and reached a deal with the teachers who are advocating for that very thing, instead of bringing, well, not necessarily him, but his cabinet, bringing through the notwithstanding clause to use it against teachers to force an agreement, which wasn't an agreement, which was legislated one-handedly onto teachers. So, Mr. Speaker, what the minister said around wanting increased intervention, I absolutely believe and agree with. But that is not what this bill does in any way, shape, or form, Mr. Speaker. This bill is clearly around sitting kids down when they're in Division 1, in kindergarten, in grade 1, in grade 2, in grade 3, and forcing a standardized mandated test on all of them. And the research is very clear that the most important thing to do when kids start in school at the beginning of the year, especially in Division 1, is build relationships, Mr. Speaker.
Building relationships is foundational to having good classroom management, to having good a sense of community in your classroom, and to students having good academic opportunities throughout that year. And what this model does, being brought forward by the minister, is it hinders the opportunity for those teachers to build those relationships with those children. I'm sure all of us in this legislature have had opportunities where we've spoken to teachers who work in the early years. Pop quiz. You can't respond to it, but you can write down your answers. Pop quiz. How many of my family members in my nuclear family that I grew up in trained as teachers? A, my dad. B, my mom. C, myself. D, none of the above. Write down your answers, friends. A couple other questions. Another one. How many, where did the honourable member grow up? Write down your answers. A, Canuso. B, Castor. C, Ontario. D, Edmonton. Okay, that's the second question. Third question. How many degrees does the member have? A, religion. B, math. C, education. D, none of the above. Okay? So the answers to the questions, I'm sure everyone sitting here with Beta Beth, I will not mark them through a Scantron because I know that some members of this place don't trust technology to mark, but I will say that in my experience, having trained as a teacher, my dad also being a teacher, my mom also being a teacher, so the answer to that was all three of us, is that the Scantron was more reliable than me at 10 p.m. marking standardized tests or multiple choice tests. I will assure you of that. Sometimes those dots move on a piece of paper when you've been marking 40 papers. The answer to towns I grew up in, all but Edmonton. I grew up in the rural communities that everyone over there likes to talk about, Canuso, Castor, Ontario. I loved my experiences, and what brought us to those communities was public education. My dad wanted to pursue an administrative opportunity, and there was a teacherage, public housing, socialized housing, for him to be enticed to go to rural Alberta, which meant my mom could spend some time at home, and we got to have a great opportunity. First principalship was in Ontario, which now has some new programming through the public education system. And then the other one I talked about was degrees. I do have a degree in religion, honourable members. I do have a degree in math. I do have a degree in education and a master's in education. And I say this not to gloat. I say this to say that people spend their lives dedicated to the study of education. I know the honourable minister has a PhD, not in education, but he has a PhD. These are things that people are committed to, and for a government to come into this place and say, you know what, we know what's best, we're going to tell you that every kindergarten teacher needs to spend less time in their classroom with their class and more time executing one-on-one standardized tests, is so counter to all of the research, Mr. Speaker. The research shows that when you do formative assessments at the beginning of the year, it can be very rich and really help your pedagogical strategies. But what is being pushed here is more of a standardized Fraser Institute style of ranking kids and ranking children. And I will tell you, one thing that I think the minister and I definitely agree on is that when kids have been told that they are not smart, it is really hard to convince them otherwise. And what these tests do is in Div 1, we've got lots of documented evidence about kids, particularly kids who are learning English, being forced to sit and read aloud when they cannot read. For students who are being...
Why don't you get up and speak?
Forcing children to sit down and be shamed and embarrassed when their teachers know. Teachers know at the beginning of the year, and they do their own formative assessments in a really ongoing way. And I love summative assessments too. I'm a big fan of knowing where we're at in relation to the curriculum, but not for the purpose that the minister brings to this place, because if he actually wanted to put those initiatives in place to make sure that we could focus on literacy and numeracy, he would have sat down and reached a collective agreement with the teachers that he took the human rights away from using the notwithstanding clause, Mr. Speaker. So I will touch on a few other things why the reason for this amendment is absolutely sound, because this legislation should not proceed at this time because it has not been thought through. Because if it was thought through, there would be money to actually support the types of intervention that are so well documented in being effective. I was the chair of the Edmonton Public School Board before I came to this place, and I will say that programs that have both inclusion and programs that have specialized focus on helping kids get to and exceed their grade level are worth their money 10 times over. Because as the minister said, when we do early intervention in a focused way, we get much better outcomes in terms of high school completion and in terms of income earning ability. And those kids who we've put that focused attention on through finances, through investment, not just through doing a test. You actually have to invest in making sure that they have the opportunities to receive the leveled, scaffolded supports that they need to be able to get up to grade level. So when I think about King Edward Academy here in Edmonton Public, for example, very small program, very, very small program, with transportation costs covered. Kids come from all over the city. They're working in very small groups with teachers who are expert teachers in their field, and the goal is to get them back up to and exceeding grade level. They have to be behind by at least 2 grades before they can be admitted, and then getting them back into their community school with the skills they need to be successful. That program has shown to be effective in a multitude of ways and a multitude of studies, and the government would be wise to look at it and find ways that they can invest in it, because right now the way they pay for that program is by taking money out of other schools to put it into that school in Edmonton Public. So when the minister brings in legislation around children not being called by their preferred name, you know what, Mr. Speaker, in Edmonton, I'm not worried about children being called much at all. Because when I look at classrooms with 40 or more students and teachers teaching 4 for 4, learning the names of the kids in the classroom is a real challenge. So if the minister actually wanted to focus on achieving the things that he's outlined in this bill, there would be a money bill coming forward, there would be a collective agreement coming forward, and there would be an investment in these children to make sure that they can achieve their outcomes. The other reason why I want the government to take this opportunity to pause, take a breath, and reflect on where they're at in terms of the education system is the first thing the government did just prior to this session actually, is announce a grandiose book banning for the province of Alberta. What a train wreck and mess that was, because somebody in the Premier's office or the Minister's office thought they knew better, thought they knew what kids should be allowed to read and not allowed to read, and that they'd go out there and they'd show everyone that teachers were terrible people, allowing awful things to be in schools, and everyone would side with the government over teachers, because who would trust teachers? Obviously, the government would be the trusted authority. Not so, Mr. Speaker. The book ban attempted by the current education minister was an embarrassment across this nation. And I happened to be I think it was 2 weeks ago, we had the Alberta Book Publishers Association in, and one of the book that I picked up, every MLA had an opportunity to pick up a book. The book I picked up is called Dear Sir, I Intend to Burn Your Book. A book written about whose voices it is when governments decide to pull books from schools to limit the amount of access kids can have to literature. What types of authors are actually having their books pulled? It is often equity-seeking authors. The clearest example in this is around books being pulled for using language that some find offensive, not understanding the historical context or who the author is. It's almost always Black authors who get books pulled from libraries when people take a rigid rule around specific language being included or excluded from libraries. The second thing this government did, of course, was sit on their hands for 3 weeks while a teacher strike was underway. Teachers who had no strike pay, teachers who knew that they indeed would have to be losing money out of their pocket, but they did that because they knew that education, public education, was too important for us to squander on this generation or the next. They were willing to take that financial hit. They were willing to leave the classroom. And I will say, as somebody who trained as a teacher and who loved teachers, both my parents, it takes a lot to make a teacher leave their children in that classroom and go out on a sidewalk. That is not something that anyone aspires to. When you pursue a career in education, you do so, and I will argue in healthcare too, because you care about people, you want to be part of a caring profession, and you want to have a chance to make things better for the next. So, Mr. Speaker, the teacher strike was an embarrassment, again, on a national level. Book ban number 1, teacher strike number 2. Then the government comes up with a great solution of what they're going to do is bring in the notwithstanding clause and use it against teachers, something that had never been used by the Alberta government before. Never. They talked about it. They talked about it with Reend. They almost did it there. But at that time, premiers actually cared about the public opinion, and Ralph Klein backed off, and they did not bring it in. This premier brought it in, used it against teachers, and now is using it against children.
Point of order has been called. The Minister of Education and Childcare.
I'm just listening very carefully, Mr. Speaker. I know that the NDP has brought forward this amendment stating that Bill 6 is ableist. I've been listening carefully for the past several minutes. I haven't heard anything in the members' comments. She's talking about the strike, notwithstanding clause, several other matters that are completely unrelated to the amendment that they brought forward. Happy to hear their arguments and reasons as to why we should support their amendment if they want to articulate them.
Opposition, Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister raised the point of order, but I didn't hear
Citation?
any citation. He just didn't like the comments, and he thought if he doesn't like the comment, that's a point of order. It's not. But what I can, I guess, deduct from Minister's argument that he might have been thinking to raise relevance. And I think the rules around relevance, I would quote from Chapter 13 of House of Commons, which talks about repetition and relevance in debate. And I'm quoting from that Chapter 13, that the requirement that speech remains relevant to the question before the House flows from the latter's right to reach decision without undue obstruction or to exclude from debate any discussion not conclusive to that end. And then it goes on to say, which is the most relevant to this argument, that it is not always possible to judge the relevance of a member's remark until he or she has spoken at some length or even completed his or her remarks. The speaker must exercise his or her discretion. If the rules are applied too strictly, they have the potential for severely curtailing the debate. I think member built on her background in education, her experience as public school trustee, and she was essentially talking about what's included in the bill and how it's not followed up with the money. I think she was squarely talking about the amendment that we are presenting, that why this bill should not proceed. She was well within the parameters of that amendment, and I don't think that even on relevance, a point of order argument is made out here. And as I said earlier, that minister didn't cite any standing order, and I think not liking somebody's debate or somebody's point is not a point of order in this House. So, thank you.
I am prepared to rule, and I am going to rule that this is not a point of order. I do believe that the member is speaking to context within the amendment with regards to our education system, and so it's a matter of debate, and I believe that the member can proceed and continue with her comments.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and hats off to my colleague, the Deputy Opposition House Leader. I do want to correct one thing that he said, though. I am confident that the Education Minister does like me, and I want to say on the record that I like him. I don't like this bill, and I don't like a lot of the ways he's been governing the education system, but I like him. And I think that when he says we should be investing in the early years, but he doesn't use investing. He talks about testing, magically meaning that we're going to be having better outcomes. It's just not true. My mom, for more family history here, spent most of her career, at the end especially, as a kindergarten teacher. At that time we called it ECS. And my mom, if it helps you learn a little bit about my personality, said it probably stood for Every Child Smiles. Because that's the job of a good Div 1 teacher, is to make sure kids go to school, that they feel good, that they feel capable, that they're excited to go back again tomorrow. When I talked to my nephew today, he's in grade 1, he told me that if he finishes his dot-to-dot and brings it into school tomorrow, he's going to get a prize. I remember those, simple dot-to-dots, figure out what the picture is. On his, there were 253 numbers that he had to connect, right? I want kids to be excited about education. I want them to find ways to be able to challenge themselves to reach greater heights. And the reason why this amendment is absolutely in order and why all of us should be voting for it is because I think the government deserves an opportunity to get something right. And this bill does not get it right. This bill talks about using a hammer, and if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's absolutely what's happening in this bill. The government's decided they've already gone after, teachers. They've already tried their book ban. That didn't work. The strike, the government lost in an embarrassing way. The government wants to try to hammer one more thing. They'll use the words literacy and numeracy, but put no money behind it, and they'll just talk about how tests can fix everything. Well, Mr. Speaker, the only point for a formative assessment is so you can do something to address the way you're teaching moving forward. And if the government is giving none of those tools to teachers to be able to amend their practice, to have reduced class sizes, to have more educational assistance, to have more professional development, to be able to actually use that formative assessment to influence how they're going to conduct their practice for the remainder of the year, then it is absolutely a waste of our time in this place, those kids' time in those classrooms, their mental health. The ATA report that my colleague, the member for Calgary-Bennington, so articulately went through really highlights the kind of pressure that this puts on kids who know that they're going to fail the test before they've even started. And one of the biggest reasons for that is either cognitive challenges or language delays. So I will also say that most teachers by the third week of September know who needs that early intervention and know who needs more support. And again, if the government wanted to focus on closing those gaps between those who are learning at or above grade level and those who are struggling, one of the best things they could have done is vote for a bill that we brought forward around government funding and providing psycho-ed assessments for every child who needed one in the early years. That could have been something. Psycho-ed assessments rather than a standardized test where kids are going to be put forward and feel embarrassed by their inability to be able to succeed. Because I will say that, especially having taught math, kids who know they're bad at math, it's so hard to convince them otherwise once they've made up their mind that they're not good at math. And I'm sure that there's people in this place who also think they're bad at math. And I want them to know that with the right supports and the right intervention, they don't need to be.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clairview. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Happy to rise to talk to the reasoned amendment as well. Some comments about the bill I'm sure will make their way into my remarks. I just wanted to begin my comments with some of my thoughts in terms of what a screener actually is and what it can actually do. A screener can certainly tell you something about where a child, and I'm thinking of the LENS, which is the literacy screener that the kids from from kindergarten to grade 3 will be using. It can certainly tell you kind of if they understand that letter sound alignment, if they're getting some of the basic understanding of phonics and phonemes and that sort of thing. But what it cannot and should not be used for, and this is also part of research, Madam Speaker, is a diagnostic assessment. While it can give you a little bit of an idea in terms of where to go with that child, it is not meant as any sort of a diagnosis. And that's one of the sort of parts of this in terms of the bill itself, which is why, of course, we're asking for the reasoned amendment that I think is really highly problematic. Because without the ability to do that diagnostic assessment, which my colleague just talked about, without the ability to have intervention, without the ability, if necessary, to go for that further reading specialist tests and perhaps a psychological assessment, you won't know if that child has some kind of a cognitive issue, if that child has a learning disability in either math or reading perhaps, or if there's something else going on, or if it's a simple gap. You won't know that, Madam Speaker. The screeners won't be able to tell you that. What we know the screeners can do right now, and this is where I will inject a few teacher voices here, as a few of my other colleagues have done. What the last couple of years of administering these screeners have told us, Madam Speaker, is that there is indeed a high negative impact in terms of how the kids feel about themselves. There is developmentally inappropriate content, and the way in which teachers are weighing that, Madam Speaker, is they're looking at the curriculum and what the curriculum demands. And I'm thinking in my head right now about the kindergarten curriculum, for instance. The screeners are demanding that kids know things that they're not supposed to know until they are in fact in grade 1, not at the end of kindergarten, but at the end of grade 1. And so it seems to me that there's a bit of a disconnect between the screeners that are being offered and the curriculum which is being taught in the schools. And that to me is a real problem. And that indeed also speaks to that limited value of some of these assessments and some of the problems, in fact, that teachers and kids have been experiencing over the last couple of years that the assessments have been used. And teachers have also, Madam Speaker, pointed to a disproportionate impact in terms of vulnerable populations. And this is where we really get into the nature of the amendment as well, where they say English language learners and students with exceptionalities still need to do the test even if they cannot really access or respond to them. And I can tell you, having given screeners in the past, that there's always a point at which, you know, you can stop the test, but the trouble is that student has already started the test. And at that point of stopping the test, that particular child already knows in their own heads that they have failed the test. And I can assure you that that is what a kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 student is thinking automatically. If you've had to stop that test too early, they are thinking automatically that they are not worthy. And so that's a problem. I think I talked earlier about a grade 3 student that I had at one point who was supposed to do a provincial achievement test, and she was worried. The teachers here talk about anxiety. She was an ELL student, had recently arrived in Canada, had some measure of English, but it certainly was by no means that academic language that's necessary for this sort of a standardized test, Madam Speaker. She was worried that she wouldn't be able to go on to grade 4. She was worried what her parents were going to think of her if she failed the test. And it didn't matter what I said. I couldn't convince her that she was still a worthy student. This is what she now believed of herself when she was 8 years old. Teachers have also said for students with complexities, these assessments are stressful and disheartening, and it feels impossible and unfair. And I will just say at this point, too, that there are screeners that teachers are doing right now in kindergarten that don't just measure literacy. They also measure other things that we all know that we expect kids coming out of kindergarten to have learned. There's a test called the I. Some teachers will call it the ITA. Essentially, it's an early years evaluation teacher assessment that measures where the child is on a spectrum in terms of 5 different domains: physical development, awareness of self and their environment, social skills, behavior, approaches to learning, cognitive skills, language, and communication. This sort of test, which is often given at the beginning of the year, gives teachers a sense of where those kids are right now. Where did they enter kindergarten? And again, where those gaps might be. But it isn't simply about numeracy, it isn't simply about literacy. It really, Madam Speaker, is about the whole of the educational experience that child can experience and expect in kindergarten. And I also will add that unlike the screeners that will soon become mandatory, sadly, these sorts of eye tests, the IEYE, will often lead to a really comprehensive assessment that is done by a speech-language pathologist. That speech-language pathologist, that SLP, is often, and I always thought of them as that first line of defense, because indeed they will often go through many of the phonemic awareness issues and that sort of thing, and they will really be able to pinpoint exactly where that child is. But it isn't this sort of generalized screener that might give you that information. The sort of more holistic, more holistic screener is more likely to give you that information because it's simply more contextual. Now, when I think about the LENS, the letter, name, sound test that will be presented and it is being given to children, one of the things, and I know that the minister and my colleagues have pointed it out, talked about intervention. Absolutely. It can point to small measures of gaps and that sort of thing, but again, it's not meant to be a diagnostic tool. And if it can't be used as a diagnostic tool, I do wonder where the efficacy is in it. There needs to be some sort of kind of path forward for that teacher. And I do understand that there are some intervention activities which come out of whatever the results happen to be for that particular child. But again, those intervention activities, Madam Speaker, are only as good as if the intervention can actually exist in a school. And in a school that is overpopulated, in a school that doesn't have daily access to a speech-language pathologist or an occupational therapist or a psychologist to be able to do those more in-depth assessments, the intervention probably isn't happening if you don't have an extra EA if you don't have an extra teacher to offer that intervention that's required to fill whatever that gap happens to be. The intervention, first of all, probably won't happen, but is little more than useless, Madam Speaker, which is unfortunate. It is, and that's a situation that teachers find themselves in right now. Even if they do the screeners, and even if they do the eye, and even if they do all sorts of formative and summative assessments in their classroom, it's all for naught, Madam Speaker, if there's nothing to support those kids who need support. If those kids who need that more in-depth psychological assessment or that more in-depth reading test can't get those more formal assessments done, then there cannot be a diagnosis of a condition like dyslexia, which I will say is not funded at all within the Special Needs Code. So if we're not providing all of the supports, then why are we making all of the kids do these screeners multiple times every single year? If the government was truly interested in ensuring kindergarten students, grade 1 kids, 2s and 3s, were making the literacy and numeracy benchmarks, I would suggest that one of the easiest ways to do that, and I know the recent classroom complexity report talked about it, is the reestablishment of program unit funding, which was cut by this government in 2019. 2020, it was decimated. Despite the fact that teachers and administrators working within those programs and paraprofessionals like those SLPs and OTs told this government, if you do this, then what we will start to see is kids' literacy scores will drop, their numeracy scores will drop, and what do you know, Madam Speaker, it's actually happened because those interventions that should and could occur when these children are 2, 3, and 4, and 5 years old weren't able to happen anymore because of what happened to Puff. That would seem to me to be a relatively easy response to some of this difficulty, Madam Speaker. Another response might be to increase the seats at universities for SLPs and OTs and PTs and psychologists and psychiatrists. One of the things that always caused me a great deal of frustration when I was teaching as well as being an assistant principal was the fact that at IPAS over at the Glenrose there was one psychiatrist, that's it, for all of the children who needed to have a formal assessment as to whether or not they might be autistic. One psychiatrist and a wait list, even when I was teaching, Madam Speaker, of very, very close to 2 years. That's unconscionable because it means that those kids, wherever they happen to lie, are not getting the support that they deserve, Madam Speaker. Not only that, but one of the things that, this I guess is really speaking to some of what the minister talked about, in terms of the universality and the need to have universal screeners, and he mentioned dyslexia and kind of the diagnosis of dyslexia, and as I've mentioned, you cannot diagnose dyslexia from the lens. You can't diagnose it from the eye. You can't diagnose it from Brigance. You can't diagnose it from Chanel. You can't diagnose it from all of these screeners. It can only be diagnosed by a person who can actually do that, like a psychiatrist or a reading specialist or a psychologist, Madam Speaker. But if these people don't exist, those diagnoses won't happen. And certainly dyslexia is one of the more complex learning disabilities that's out there. And I might add as well that in the pre-service end of becoming a teacher, teachers do not know generally how to intervene for a child who's received that diagnosis of dyslexia. It's one of those more complicated diagnoses. But imagine if teachers received that training, imagine if teachers received the support, imagine if they received the materials necessary, and then imagine if generally across all of Alberta, dyslexia was actually properly funded. It would make a change. That would make a change, not doing a screener, Madam Speaker. And in terms of, though, the specifics of screening for dyslexia, there was an article that was published just a few days ago, 2025, in the Annals of Dyslexia, and it talks about not-so-universal literacy screening. A survey of educators reveals variability in implementation. And what they have found, Madam Speaker, is that even with universal screeners as they're being offered, There are real problems in terms of the implementation, and it isn't all just down to the teachers. Some of it is because the kids themselves, as we talked about, are inherently complex human beings, and they come to us with those complexities. And if we don't understand what those complexities are, we are indeed doing them a disservice when we offer them a particular screener. Certainly in their report, they talk about training quality, which I just talked about. My colleague from Glenora talked about professional development. There also need to be practice opportunities and feedback systems. Teachers need support if we're going to be asking them to administer these screeners. And that support right now, Madam Speaker, just doesn't exist. Not only that, in terms of kids who are ELLs, there's assessment challenges. And 92% of the respondents who responded to this particular survey reported that ELL students were screened in their schools, yet 22% of those folks believed that those students could not be reliably identified for literacy difficulty. Significantly, 40% of respondents incorrectly marked linguistic variations due to ELL status as incorrect. And this is because teachers, although teachers are lovely and teachers are well-meaning and teachers are very well-educated, teachers don't know some of those specifics, Madam Speaker. I can remember filling out the ELL reports and having to go back to the person at Edmonton Public who was kind of in charge of our own professional development where ELL kids were concerned. And every single year I would have to ask questions because there were things I just didn't know, because I wanted to make sure that I got that ELL assessment right for that child so I wasn't doing that child a disservice. And what this amendment is really about, Madam Speaker, it's about doing these children a disservice. And I will say as well, and this is where I'll come back to that issue of screeners, one of the jobs that I had a few years ago was as a literacy person in a school. And it didn't mean that I knew everything about literacy, but what it did mean was that we were able to talk to other people in our catchment, in our area, and bring in some literacy specialists. And I can remember a friend of mine came in and from Right to Read, which is the Learning Disabilities Association of Alberta's program. She went through not just a day or two of training, she went through some really, really comprehensive training. And then it ended up being a particular program for our grade 1 students. And she took the better part of 2 weeks to assess not all the grade 1 students, but only some of them. The information that she...
Are there others? The Honourable Member for Calgary Foothills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am happy to rise and speak to the amendment to Bill 6 and agree with the amendment that this bill should proceed no further. And I have to say that as I stand and speak to the amendment this evening, I'm humbled by the fact that I am following two of my caucus colleagues who are teachers and who know a great deal about the topic of discussion. And I think they have raised some excellent points. And certainly really landing on and hearing that, the minister talked about how, this is an investment into the supports for kids. This is not an investment into the supports for kids. And in fact, that's what is really lacking in Bill 6. It doesn't actually do anything to support the kids. There's a lot of talk about identification of the needs for supports, but the actual supports aren't in Bill 6. So, which is, making the amendment to Bill 6 very relevant. There are also a lot of references, academic references, that discuss the lack of, clear conclusions on the effectiveness of screening in the early years, particularly with children with disabilities, which is, again, brings us back to the amendment. My colleague just referred to interestingly, we both did this independently, a study published in the Annals of Dyslexia. And the minister did also refer to the supports that he was getting from the Lead for Dyslexia Canada. But what he didn't talk about was that the dyslexia journals that are talking about this topic really talk a lot about when the consistency in the screening but also the interventions that are offered. That without the identification and the provision of those interventions, then the screening does not achieve what we're trying to achieve. You know, many of the states in the United States have enacted legislation. The minister talked about provinces that are ahead of Alberta in this. That many of the states, most of the states have enacted legislation mandating universal screening for literacy and numeracy in grades K to 3. And I expect that just like American-style private health care, that this government is motivated to follow the lead of the United States, despite the fact that the evidence shows that the United States has lower educational outcomes than Canada. And Madam Speaker, the study that I'm referring to looked at the practices in 251 schools across 39 states. They found an incredible degree of variability in screener selection, in the administrative practices around the screening, the testing environments for the screening, trainer quality, scoring accuracy, and the use of the results to guide intervention. And Madam Speaker, if the members opposite, if the minister had been reading the emails that have been sent to him that were copied to my office, teachers are raising these issues, that they have not been provided additional training. They are identifying, inconsistencies in how we're scoring in the screening. They are identifying that they're not getting information back from the department on how these screening assessments are being used. They're saying that they're not getting guides to what to be done with the screening assessments. They're saying that there is no intervention. In fact, that's what they were saying when they went on strike. They are lacking the resources to support children in our schools. And Bill 6 isn't doing anything to help that. This is not the only study, Madam Speaker, that comments on the ineffectiveness of screening if there are not clear interpretation of the results with planned interventions and the supports there for those interventions. Many educators in the study indicated they received insufficient training and professional development in conducting the screening, and that this also results in the ineffectiveness of the screening. And this was particularly pronounced in children with disabilities and in neighborhood schools with lower socioeconomic status. Madam Speaker, without the training and the supports and the planned interventions, and actually coming in with those interventions, the outcomes in the children could be worse. The minister talks about how children are feeling like they have failed. These screeners are amplifying children feeling like they are failing, with nothing there to pick them up and help them move forward. Nothing there to help teachers pick them up and help them move forward. And of course, this government is going down this path without having developed any of the necessary training for teachers, without the foresight to ensure consistency in measuring and reporting, and certainly without the resources and plans in place to act on the screening, Madam Speaker. If this government were serious about improving outcomes for our kids, they would fund public education so teachers had the resources they needed to teach the kids. Teachers already know the children that are struggling in their classrooms, and they wish that they could help, but they don't have the resources to do so. That's why they went on strike, Madam Speaker, and unfortunately the government sent them back without doing anything to help them. This government voted down a bill brought forward by the Alberta New Democrats to return to measuring class sizes and complexity. The government voted it down. And now they stand and say that they care about classroom sizes and complexity. Committee referring to committee. This government voted down a bill brought forward by the Alberta New Democrats to ensure that children who needed psychoed assessments for learning disabilities could get them. Madam Speaker, if we did more, if we really cared about intervention, then why aren't we funding and providing the resources there for kids to get psychoed assessments? If we were doing that, then we could move mountains in helping these children move forward with the curriculum that's put before them. What is the point of assessing children for literacy and numeracy when you don't even make sure that we've assessed the children for learning disabilities? It doesn't make any sense, Madam Speaker, which is why I support the amendment to this bill. What can we possibly hope to do with the information that we're gathered when we know that the data is flawed? That we're testing kids without having done the appropriate assessments first, as my colleague from Beverly Clairview was mentioning, that these assessments aren't the assessments needed to know if a child has dyslexia. And unless we know that that child has dyslexia, how are we bringing forward the correct interventions and supports for that child, making these screenings useless and potentially damaging? Madam Speaker, according to the ATA, these screening assessments are causing kids higher levels of anxiety, lower levels of engagement, and this is worse with children with disabilities. That's why in our amendment we say that this legislation is ableist.
And it is.
Children today that aren't responding to input will regress even further. What is the government doing with the information that they already have to address classroom complexity? Madam Speaker, the answer to that is nothing. Teachers already know the children that are struggling, that are performing below grade level. Teachers have already told us that these screeners, that the level of assessment is inappropriate. And now we mandate these teachers back to work when they were raising these issues while they were on strike. We're refusing to even acknowledge the challenges that are being faced. Here's a note that was sent to the Minister of Education and copied to my office from a concerned teacher, Madam Speaker. I am writing to you again concerning the mandatory screening assessments that have been implemented this year. This is from the spring, as it is May, and I have again completed the screeners. I have already sent many emails about my feelings on this and received no response, nor what seems to be an understanding for what this is doing to the system. I do not feel teachers nor the ATA are being listened to. We have explained, shared, and advocated for those to be removed, and nothing is being done. To finish the year off, I again had to assess my students. Once more, I took valuable teaching time. There were students who did not make the list who are still struggling. I already knew who the students are who are struggling. The data has been taking 1 to 2 months to come back to me, and at that point, we are at the end of the school year. Testing with no extra funding or supports is unacceptable. If you are looking for money to put into the system, deleting these screeners would be a way to find some money to put money where it's going to be useful in the system, Madam Speaker. This teacher and constituent goes on to say that they will continue to advocate for the removal of these until it happens. I would love to meet with you to discuss over the phone. But we could meet this teacher's suggestions, Madam Speaker, if we voted yes to this amendment. I have another letter from a teacher who lives in Calgary Foothills. These letters comment on all children. Teachers and the ATA have expressed their concerns that the consequences are more pronounced with children with disabilities. Implementing these tests to all students, as the bill doesn't make any accommodations for any children, will be detrimental. Children will experience higher levels of anxiety. The feeling of separation and not being smart will be more pronounced, causing irreparable damage to the learning that is still to come in their lives. This teacher says that they teach grade 1 and 2 for the last 3 years, and they have had first-hand experience with the testing process that the government implemented. These tests take up almost an entire month from start to finish to complete. This means that the test is happening 3 times a year over 3 months of valuable instruction time that is being used up to assess these students. This makes 0 sense, Madam Speaker. These are not developmentally appropriate. This teacher goes on to say that she was shocked to see that kindergarten was a part of the testing process at the beginning of the kindergarten year. Kindergarten isn't even mandatory in Alberta, Madam Speaker, and you're implementing a standardized assessment. In grade 1, they found the test was stressful and upsetting. Cannot imagine a child in kindergarten doing these screeners. I've said these words about every curriculum and now these tests. This brings me to the next point. Madam Speaker, this teacher goes on to say the actual assessments do not directly correlate to the curriculum. Math specifically on this note, things that have not been taught are being assessed at the beginning of the year. As an example, in kindergarten, number lines to 100 and finding a number on the line. Timed addition and subtraction. These children haven't even been exposed to this curriculum yet, and they're being screened. Madam Speaker, the teacher goes on to say the assessment for learning the standardized test does not give teachers information about students to help them better. The time of the assessment data sent back to the teachers is no longer relevant. I am unsure about the parents. When do parents receive this assessment information? Many teachers are not providing that information to the parents. Therefore, it doesn't help teachers assess students and better teach them, and if parents aren't being informed, what are the values of these screeners? Madam Speaker, the teacher goes on to say standardized tests don't make for smarter kids. They don't reduce class sizes. They don't provide the EA support that are needed for these kids. Madam Speaker, teachers have been calling for help, literally calling the minister's office and asking for help. But those calls are falling on deaf ears, Madam Speaker. This government forced them back to work without making any changes to make classroom conditions better. Bill 6 does nothing to make classroom conditions better or anything better for our children, and therefore I support this amendment. The legislation is ableist. The legislation is ignoring the differentiation and the complexities in our classroom. Madam Speaker, quite frankly, we can do better. There are many proposals out there that we could be pursuing. I encourage everyone in this House to support the amendment.
The honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you. I'll support the amendment. Thank you very much from the member for Calgary Foothills for elucidating all those reasons why the amendment should be supported for that is put forward by Calgary Mountain View, I think, put it forward. You know, I learned a great deal just listening to my colleagues who have the background of being leaders of school boards, teachers, principals, and it's not that I needed convincing that Bill 6 was a bad bill, but they provided a great deal of good information about why it should not be read a second time. Bill 6 should not be read a second time. And you know, the proof points for me, Madam Speaker, are well, I learned Div 1 is a term used for kindergarten kids up to grade 3, I think. Div 1 kids really just need encouragement to get in there and learn every day. And you have to be a really special teacher to be able to have that level of understanding of what your young students need and to make them come back every day feeling like they're fired up and want to learn the next thing. And the proof point for me was that the results of testing as proposed, and I was listening to the minister talk about them, the results of that testing aren't tied to any mechanisms around funding the deficits that are found. And we know historically, as my colleague from Edmonton Beverly Clareview talked about, that PUF funding was that way of trying to address the shortcomings or the deficits that students would have. And we know what happened to that, Madam Speaker, with the previous government to this one. It was unceremoniously cut and EAs and others, psychoeducation assessment psychologists, they were all fired by the previous government. And so we see the deficit starting to accumulate, and the minister says he wants to kind of get in there and find out what those deficits are. Well, you broke the system, Madam Speaker, or the previous governments broke the system, and now they're saying, let's find out where it is in terms of the abilities. So the problem with Bill 6 is that not one more dollar will go into hiring people to make up for those deficits. We'll find, as a result, we'll find children who are stressed as a result of testing. They're discouraged, despondent, and that's not a good learning environment. So I think what I've heard from my colleagues on this side is there's reason enough to not read this a second time, to go back, to take another look, and do better as a government, and bring back bills that have money bills attached to them so that our students can get the support they need, and dedicated resources can be directed towards helping kids achieve the goal we all want for them, and that is that all students are successful. So we're not finding that in anything that Bill 6 has before us. We've put a reasoned amendment to raise that flag and to say, do better. And with that said, I'll sit down and let my colleague take it over. Thanks.
The honourable member for Edmonton McClung.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise tonight to Deep 6, Bill 6, and there are plenty of reasons why that should be done, Madam Speaker. I notice that the Minister of Education is deeply hurt when he is hearing the word ableist to describe his bill, but in fact, that is definitely what we're talking about, Madam Speaker. The Assembly is of the view that the proposed screening, assessment, and reporting requirements are deeply ableist, and according to the Minister, that's absolutely wrong. However, in this legislature and across the province, Madam Speaker, people have rightly come to the conclusion they should be asking who's next. First, teachers in this province were denied their constitutional and fundamental rights to strike and to reach a fairly negotiated agreement. Next thing you know, trans youth were denied their fundamental charter rights. And who's next is the question that everybody in this province is asking, Madam Speaker. Who's next to be denied their fundamental rights? As a member from Edmonton Glenora has said earlier, let's connect the dots. Why does the government wish to take control over who is quote unquote able to continue in their classroom? Who belongs? Who doesn't? Who needs to be separated from the class for quote unquote special attention? The government's underlying message behind Bill 6, in my view, Madam Speaker, is why it must not now be read a second time. And is it that the student's fault? Is it the student's fault for falling behind? It seems to be what the government is saying. Divide the class into achievers and non-achievers. Blame the lower achieving students for being there. That's ableism in its most raw form, Madam Speaker. If we need further definition about ableism, I can refer to definitions offered by Ableism 101, a group out of Chicago, who talks about ableism being the description of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. At its heart, ableism is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require fixing and defines people by their disability. Like racism and sexism, ableism classifies entire groups of people as less than, and includes harmful stereotypes, misconceptions, and generalizations of people with disabilities, unquote. So ableism in its most pure and raw form is what Bill 6 is all about. Now, where does the government ultimately intend to go with this intentionally targeting bill? In years past, we all know where the school system found space for children with special needs, where they were located. Outside of it, Madam Speaker, they were not included. outside looking in. That's where children with special needs were placed. They didn't belong in the school system. Now today, thankfully, those folks, all children are in our classrooms as valued participants, perhaps until now. Bill 6 begs the question, why? Well, perhaps UCP strategists are saying, don't waste a good crisis. Strategists seem to be saying that. Let's blame anyone but our government education policy since 2019 for the poor learning outcomes. Let's do a study which divides students into groups. And let's blame poor performance outcomes on inclusive policies of former governments which allowed special needs students to be in every school, in every classroom. And so we have K-3 student achievement tests, Madam Speaker, administered by teachers who were fully able to identify students who are falling behind themselves. They certainly don't need these achievement tests to do so, but the government is bringing these achievement tests in, these tests to identify students who are falling behind. For what purpose, I ask, Madam Speaker? I think the answer is pretty clear if you connect the dots and maybe read between the lines a little bit. The UCP government created the made-to-fail approach by starving Alberta classrooms of resources needed to serve the needs of all students in this province. And as a result of that, they now are looking at a situation where they're trying to blame somebody else for their own failures and misgivings. So, Madam Speaker, I think the true intent ultimately in this Bill 6, is something that will end up denying the rights of students with special needs to actually be in school again, to go backwards to a point in time, Madam Speaker, where students with special needs were not in the classroom, in our regular classrooms. And what we look at as definitions of ableism, or what it actually looks like, it can be described as segregating students with disabilities into separate schools, segregating adults and children with disabilities in institutions. Now, Madam Speaker, the government may deny that's exactly where they're headed, but it certainly seems to me to be where they're going. So I know that we have limited time left on tonight's debate, but I wanted to make it abundantly clear that if you do connect the dots, Madam Speaker, there is a clear path to understanding what the government's motivation is, and it very well may be leading to a situation where students with disabilities are targeted next for denial of their fundamental rights under the Charter. And that will be to segregate them once again in schools, apart from the regular school system. And Madam Speaker, that's my greatest fear with Bill 6, and I really hope that I'm wrong, but I do expect that the government will ultimately show their true hand. So with that, Madam Speaker, I think I am now close enough to time to move to adjourn debate.
Having heard the motion to adjourn debate, all those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that the Assembly be adjourned until 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday, November 25th, 2025.
Well, having heard that motion, all those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 1:30.